Trade tensions between the United States and China continue to escalate, evolving into one of the most consequential economic standoffs of the 21st century. What began as a dispute over trade imbalances and intellectual property has since expanded into a broader conflict encompassing technology, national security, and global economic dominance. Under President Donald Trump's leadership, the U.S. government has adopted an increasingly confrontational stance, marked by successive rounds of tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars in Chinese goods. This aggressive posture, aimed at pressuring Beijing to make structural reforms to its trade practices, has not only disrupted the flow of goods and capital between the two countries, but has also sent shockwaves through global supply chains, investor confidence, and international diplomatic circles. The Trump administration's strategy has been framed domestically as an effort to protect American industries, reduce reliance on foreign manufacturing, and reassert U.S. economic sovereignty. However, the ripple effects have been felt worldwide. Multinational corporations have had to reassess production networks, countries integrated into China-centric supply chains face increased uncertainty, and financial markets have responded with volatility amid each new escalation. What once resembled a calculated negotiation has now taken on the characteristics of a prolonged economic Cold War, with neither side showing signs of yielding ground. Despite the firm rhetoric and apparent confidence displayed by the U.S. president, many analysts and policymakers remain skeptical about whether a coherent, long-term strategy underpins these decisions. Critics argue that the administration is often acting impulsively, responding to short-term political gains rather than outlining a clear roadmap for sustainable economic policy. Furthermore, there is concern that the U.S. may be underestimating the breadth and sophistication of China's retaliatory capabilities, not only through tariffs but also via restrictions on critical raw materials, influence over global institutions, and leverage in emerging markets. Without a transparent and coordinated plan, experts warn that the current trajectory could backfire, weakening the very sectors the U.S. seeks to protect and alienating key allies who are also navigating the fallout of this growing economic confrontation. One of the most critical and often underestimated aspects of the current U.S.-China trade confrontation is the immense retaliatory capacity that China possesses, particularly through its control of key sectors in the global supply chain. While much attention has been given to tariffs and trade deficits, experts have increasingly pointed out that the United States may be overlooking the extent to which its own economy is entangled with, and in many ways dependent upon, Chinese exports of essential goods and raw materials. This is not merely a matter of consumer electronics or low-cost manufacturing. It reaches into the core of strategic industries, including pharmaceuticals, rare earth elements, and advanced technology components. Take, for instance, the pharmaceutical sector. Nearly half of the antibiotics consumed in the United States are sourced directly or indirectly from Chinese manufacturers. Any disruption in this supply, whether through formal export bans, informal pressure, or logistical complications, could have profound public health consequences, especially in times of medical crisis or global pandemics. Beyond medicine, China also holds a near monopoly on the production of critical minerals such as gallium and germanium, both of which are indispensable for manufacturing semiconductors, optical equipment, and military-grade electronics. These materials form the backbone of countless high-tech applications, including the production of NVIDIA chips, which themselves were recently targeted by U.S. export restrictions aimed at curbing Chinese access to advanced computing power. This asymmetry highlights a structural vulnerability within the American economic model. While the U.S. may hold financial and military dominance, its industrial ecosystem still relies heavily on inputs that are either controlled or heavily influenced by Chinese suppliers. Such dependency places Washington in a precarious position. While it may escalate trade penalties with the intention of pressuring Beijing, it simultaneously risks triggering a backlash that could paralyze critical segments of its own economy. The concern among many analysts is that the current administration's actions do not reflect a full appreciation of this delicate interdependence. Rather than presenting a carefully weighed response plan that accounts for reciprocal impacts, the strategy appears driven more by political signaling than by a comprehensive assessment of long-term consequences. This disconnect raises fundamental questions about the wisdom and sustainability of the tariff war. If China were to strategically leverage its dominance over these supply chains, not necessarily through sweeping embargoes, but through subtle slowdowns, pricing shifts, or alternative alliances, it could exert significant pressure on the U.S. economy without engaging in direct confrontation. In this light, what may appear on the surface as a battle of wills could, in reality, be a high-stakes game of economic brinkmanship, one in which the costs of miscalculation are dangerously high. Amid the mounting uncertainty, some observers have begun to question whether the seemingly bold and confrontational posture adopted by the U.S. administration is truly impulsive, or if it might, in fact, be guided by confidential intelligence or strategic insights not available to the public. This line of speculation suggests that President Trump could be operating with access to privileged information, whether economic forecasts, geopolitical assessments, or classified reports, that would justify a risk-heavy approach to a trade war with such far-reaching implications. In this interpretation, what may appear to many as erratic or improvised could be, instead, a calculated gamble within a larger, albeit hidden, strategic framework. If that is indeed the case, some analysts argue that Trump's actions might reflect a long game, designed not only to pressure China economically but to fundamentally shift the architecture of global trade in favor of U.S. interests. By forcing confrontation now, this perspective holds, the administration may be seeking to address structural imbalances that have persisted for decades, even at the cost of short-term turbulence. Such a strategy would require considerable foresight, political will, and resilience, not just from the government but from the American economy and its citizens as a whole. However, this interpretation remains speculative at best. To date, there has been little concrete evidence of a unified or transparent strategic plan behind the administration's moves. On the contrary, the actions taken often appear reactive, inconsistent, and driven by political expediency rather than a coherent doctrine. Sudden policy shifts, unexpected tariff announcements, and public messaging via social media have contributed to a perception of unpredictability, raising concerns among allies, investors, and global institutions about the stability and direction of U.S. policy. In the absence of clear communication or demonstrable outcomes, the idea of a master strategy remains more of a hypothesis than a confirmed reality. Meanwhile, the rest of the world watches with growing apprehension as the trade standoff between the United States and China unfolds. As the two largest economies on the planet, their conflict has repercussions that stretch far beyond bilateral relations. The ripple effects are already being felt across international markets, supply chains, and diplomatic channels, from Southeast Asia to Europe, from commodities exchanges to central banks. The stakes are nothing short of global. The outcome of this prolonged economic confrontation will likely shape the future of international trade norms, redefine power dynamics in the 21st century, and test the resilience of global financial systems in ways not seen since the last major economic crises. In this high-stakes environment, the world is left to navigate a delicate balance, hoping for de-escalation, preparing for volatility, and trying to anticipate the next move in a geopolitical chess match whose implications will resonate for years to come.